our shoulders. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all our distinguished participants, including heads of state, ministers, members of parliament, intellectuals, academics, and media professionals, who chose to come to Israel and participate in the conference events held yesterday and today. Joining us today are His Excellency Mr. Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania, Mr. Scott Morrison, the Area Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Sebastian Kurz, the former Chancellor of Austria, ministers and members of Parliament from around the world, as well as leading intellectuals, thinkers, stakeholders, and opinion shapers. Before we begin, I would like to thank Mr. Amichai Shikli, Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, and the entire team at his ministry for initiating this conference and within just 2 years transforming it into one of the most significant global events in the fight against anti-Semitism. I would also like to thank the Directorate for National Events and Ceremonies at the Prime Minister's office. Your Excellency, we are honored that you joined us this morning, and I kindly invite you to address the audience.
Good morning, Boker Tov, dear friends, welcome. Thank you, Minister Amichai Shikli, Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, for gathering this very distinguished gathering of people from all over the world and from Israel. I want to say a word about my friend Amichai Shikli. He's a very thoughtful, innovative minister and leader, and I thank you for your initiative. My dear friend, Your Excellency Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania, and Mrs. Linda Rama, you should know, dear friends, that I had the enormous pleasure of bestowing upon Prime Minister Rama the Israeli Presidential Medal of Honor last year because of his incredible, steadfast support of the people of Israel and the Jewish people for decades already. And I'm very proud and honored that you're here with us, my dear brother. Mr. János Boka, Minister of European Affairs of Hungary, Mr. Mariano Cunero Libarona, Minister of Justice of Argentina, the Honorable Scott Morrison and Mrs. Morrison. Mr. Morrison is the former Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Sebastian Kurz, former Federal Chancellor of the Republic of Austria, and Rabbi Yoram Ullman, founder of the Chabad at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia, whom I'm going to visit in a few weeks' time in Australia. We're so moved to have you here with us, and we pay our heartfelt condolences to you, your friends, and your family. And I want to welcome distinguished members of Parliament and elected officials, honored rabbis, heads of organizations, senior community leaders, and all of you distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday, and I know your heart has lost a beat just like us, after 834 days of anguished anticipation, Staff Sergeant Ram Vili returned to Israel. Rani, as we all call him, and his family calls him, who did not hesitate for a moment on October 7th, running directly into the line of fire to protect his country, his fellow citizens, and fellow human beings, has come home at last. His return signals a significant turning point. For the first time since 2014, not a single Israeli citizen, living or dead, is being held as a human bargaining chip in Gaza. As we, as a society, can start healing again with heavy hearts but in good conscience, I send our embrace to Rani's family, especially his parents, Talik and Itzik, who fought heroically with remarkable courage for their son. I want to thank everyone who was involved in bringing Rani home, the Israel Defense Forces and the security organizations, the Israeli government headed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, all the countries involved in brokering the different hostage agreements, especially our greatest ally and friend, the United States of America. Particularly, I want to acknowledge and thank President Donald J. Trump and his advisors, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. May Rani's memory be a blessing upon us all. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, 81 years ago today, the gates of Auschwitz opened, and the world gazed into the darkness of pure evil. Here and now we gather in the of the Jewish people, eternal symbol of truth and peace, the capital of the independent state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, the only one on the earth, to act upon that, what we call sacred duty of all people of goodwill, to remember and to bear witness, to open our hearts to the grief of the past. In fact, here I'm rushing to meet hundreds of Holocaust survivors in Ramleh, and that is why I apologize in advance, but I won't stay. We are here to add our voice to the eternal vow of never again. The Holocaust, the Shoah, was the single greatest catastrophe in the history of humanity and in the history of our people. And yet, it was upon those ashes of unthinkable destruction that a deep cry emerged, an outcry for repair, healing, and justice, an outcry for fraternity, cooperation, and building. It was an outcry that emerged not only from the depth of humankind, but from the grieving, tortured bellies of individual men and women, women and men, who dedicated their lives to reversing the torment that had been inflicted upon them and their generation by crafting a world where they could never again come to pass. One of those men was Sir Hirsch Lauterpacht, a proud Jew born in Poland, whose entire family perished in the Shoah, and who became a giant in the field of international law. And he was my mother's uncle, so he was my great uncle. Professor Lauterpacht was part of the team that prosecuted the Nuremberg trials, and it was he who came forward as one of the founders of the International Court of Justice, later serving on its bench. The man who saw with his very own eyes in the Nuremberg courtroom the cruelest of human beings, the Nazis who annihilated his family and 1/3 of our people and sought to erase all of them. This man was also the one to formulate the legal definition of crimes against humanity. My great uncle did all of this out of deep faith and hope that the international community would forever be committed to preventing these heinous crimes from ever happening again to the Jewish people or any other people, and committed to delivering justice for the sake of all humanity. It is him I call to mind as I stand here today. It is his shock and horror I imagine now, as we gather not only to remember the past, but also to look honestly at the present. I cannot help but ask myself, what would he say as we gather to name the painful truth, the blind and destructive hatred he dedicated his life to combating, unfortunately, lives on. Moreover, the pain is greater because the very legal institutions that he helped to create have become overtaken by politics, cynical politics, and have turned against the nation of Israel in its most challenging time. Ladies and gentlemen, gathering to remember and to bear witness is not a passive act. It does not relieve us of our duties, nor clear our responsibilities. To the contrary, it points us squarely to beholding them with honesty. It demands of us all, as a humankind that has been seared with the knowledge of the perils of hatred, to cast our gaze honestly at our present. The fact is, my friends, that a mere 81 years following the sacred vow of never again, we are witnessing the unraveling of the very moral architecture that the best of our human conscience has labored so deeply to put into place. When hatred once again has become a legitimate form of political activism, when Jews feel compelled to hide their identities on the streets of London and Paris, when Jewish children must be escorted by armed guards to school in the morning, and Jewish worshippers must be protected on Saturday mornings from Toronto to Boston to Buenos Aires. When we watch the blood of Jewish worshippers being spilled in Manchester on Yom Kippur, and when we mourn the innocent massacred at Hanukkah celebration in Sydney, when Jewish students at universities across the United States and Europe are isolated, alienated, and harassed for being Jewish, for being Zionists, for being who they are, it is clear we are failing to meet our vow. We are failing to meet our duties to humanity, and the responsibility is for humanity and for us at large. Today, we face an axis of hate that spreads from the incitement of the Ayatollahs in Tehran, Hamas in Gaza, and blood libels in the halls of international institutions, to television screens across the globe, and mobs on the streets of Western capitals and campuses, and of course, on social networks. The same old plague has been let loose on our societies once again. The rationale may be different, but it is the same ancient poison. It has taken many forms, but it has always carried the same name: anti-Semitism. Let us call it what it is. Let us state clearly: to deny the Jewish people, and only the Jewish people, the right to self-determination in their national homeland is anti-Semitism, even if you are the mayor of the city with the most Jews outside of Israel. And how we respond to it truly matters. First, definition. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism offers the tool of convention, a critical convergence on an accepted meaning for anti-Semitism, and it must be universally adopted. Second, enforcement and justice. Fighting the axis of hatred means fighting it head-on, online, on campuses, in the streets of our cities, everywhere. Third, education. Deep, honest education about Jewish history and tradition, the Holocaust, Zionism, and Israel. Fourth, responsibility, especially from technology companies, AI included. Freedom of speech must be always protected, but that does not include the freedom to incite violence, lie about the Jews, their religion, their traditions, and their nation state. Fifth, diplomatic courage and stamina in calling out all states, governments, and political leaders who promote anti-Semitism in all its political forms. That is why I commend the leaders who are here, headed by the Prime Minister of Albania. So let us state clearly here and now, if you claim to oppose anti-Semitism whilst cancelling the most effective and instructive definition of anti-Semitism, your words become hollow and meaningless. So ladies and gentlemen, it was my own late father, Chaim Herzog, Israel's 6th president, who upon entering the gates of Bergen-Belsen as a British officer, cried out to his broken sisters and brothers, reassuring them of something they feared was not longer true. He told them in Yiddish, in Zehnen noch Yidden, there are still Jews left, because they thought all Jews have been annihilated. And there are still many Jews left, thank God. And we are all here. And Am Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. Not by the grace of others, but by the merit of our labors, our resilience, our courage, our determination, our faith in God, and our deep faith in life. The same faith that leaves us open to the possibility that this region too can become an anchor of fraternity, prosperity, and peace for all of our neighbors and us. The same faith that believes in humanity, in justice, and in a repaired world, and in the fact that Jews, Muslims, Christians, and all members of other religions can dwell together in peace and harmony. Bless you all, thank you, and may we all go together from strength to strength. Toda rabah to all of you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, the President of the State of Israel. Distinguished guests, I wish to thank His Excellency, the President of the State of Israel, for his participation. Due to further commitments, the President must leave us now. Would the audience please once again stand in honor as the President exits. Please be seated. And now I am pleased to invite the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, Mr. Amichai Shikli, to deliver opening remarks.
The Prime Minister of Albania, Mr. Edi Rama, the 30th Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, former Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, my dear friend, Janos Boka, who came sick to be with us, is the Minister of European Affairs in Hungary, ministers, members of parliaments, ambassadors, leaders of Jewish communities, mayors, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning, and welcome to the International Conference for Combating Anti-Semitism. Today, January 27th, we gather together here in Jerusalem on the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On this day, the day of liberation of Auschwitz, we remember the past so that we guard our future. The summer of 1944, the final summer of Auschwitz, was the deadliest and most horrific in its short history. Between May 15 and July 7th, 1944, 437,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. 3 to 4 trains arrived each day. each of them with 45 cars, each car packed with about 80 human beings, all families, children, parents, and elders. Upon arrival, most children, women, and adults were sent directly to the 4 gas chambers, each holding between 1,500 to 2,000 people. Death was not instant. Terrifying minutes of waiting, doors sealed, gas filling the room, long minutes of unbearable suffering as fingernails clawed at the walls until the victim perished. On average, in that first summer, 500 Jews were murdered every hour. In his book Night, Elie Wiesel described a scene that defies comprehension. Not far from us, he wrote, flames rose from a pit. They were burning something there. A truck approached, unloaded its cargo. Small children. Yes, I saw this with my own eyes. Children burned in the flames. As the Red Army approached, the Nazis quickly evacuated Auschwitz. About 60,000 prisoners were forced on the brutal marches westward in winter cold, without food or shelter. Thousands died along the roadside. No graves, no names. When the Soviet forces reached Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they found only 7,000 survivors, starved, ill, barely alive. There was no celebration of victory, only profound sorrow and pain. Before the war, the Jewish people numbered approximately 17 million. By its end, just over 11 million remained. In 6 years, we have lost 1/3 of our sons and daughters. Today, we number roughly 15.5 million people. 81 years have passed, and the Jewish people have still not fully recovered from the horrific campaign of annihilation carried out by Nazi Germany. 81 years have passed, and yet an axe is still raised against us, seeking to destroy the small Jewish state and to harm Jews at every point on the globe. From the kibbutzim and communities in southern Israel, still scarred by the barbaric Hamas atrocities of October 7th, to Manchester and Sydney. This is the X of Islamist fanaticism, deeply influenced by Nazi ideology, and in some ways, a continuation of it. It was not a coincidence that our brave IDF soldiers found numerous copies of Mein Kampf in Gaza and Lebanon. It is no coincidence that members of Hamas and Hezbollah give a Nazi salute in their marches. It is no coincidence that swastikas have been repeatedly displayed at Hamas rallies. Even before the Second World War, Hitler and the Nazi movement were idolized in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, and in mandatory Palestine. Political Islam, which gained momentum following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, enthusiastically adopted Nazi racial anti-Semitism and closed it in Islamist religious anti-Semitism. Hassan al-Banna and the Grand Mufti Amin Husseini founded what can be termed Islamo-Nazism, an ideological synthesis that became later on the central pillar in ideology of Hamas in the Ashar's gang in Syria, Muslim Brotherhood movements in Qatar, Turkey, Europe, and the US. The connection between the Jerusalem Mufti and the German Führer is well known, but its depth is less widely understood. Hitler financed the Mufti prestigious office in Germany, das Arabische Büro der Großmufti, which was in charge of Nazi propaganda in Arabic throughout the Muslim world, broadcast the radio from Berlin to the entire Muslim world. In November 1943, Hajj Amin al-Husseini declared, "It is the duty of the Muhammadans," he means the Muslims in general, in all Arab countries, to drive all Jews out of all Arab countries. Germany too is fighting against the common enemy that has oppressed Arabs and Mohammedans in their various countries, he continued. It has clearly recognized who the Jews are and has decided to find a final solution to the Jewish danger that will eliminate once and for all the source of the evil that the Jews represent in the world. That was the Mufti's words. He organized Muslim SS units who assisted in the extermination of the Jews of the Balkan and exerted every effort to prevent any initiative to rescue Jews. In Berlin radio broadcasts in Arabic on March 1944, he proclaimed, "Kill the Jews wherever you find them. It pleases God." The same spirit is embraced in the Hamas charter that opens with the remark saying Israel will arise and continues to exist until Islam eradicated. This conference seeks to banish political correctness, to call a child by its true name, and to mobilize all essential forces in the ideological and physical fight against the modern hires of the Nazis, who are now committing horrific massacre against Kurdish minority in Rojava, Syria, against innocent civilians in Iran, and against Jews and Christians across the globe. This is not merely the fight of the Jewish people, it is the fight of the free world against the imperialism and tyranny of fanatic Islamism, against mass slaughter and rape, against horrifying barbarism, and its attempt to buy off influence and decision makers worldwide. We will not be silenced in the face of these atrocities, and we will not allow Islamo-Nazism to achieve its goal. Never again must be more than words, and let it be our action, and let it be now. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Shakely. Pesach is the Albanian Code of Honor, a social and moral commitment whose implementation by the Albanian people and their leaders led to the rescue of Albanian Jews and Jewish refugees during the Holocaust. While some European countries collaborated with the Nazis in the extermination of the Jewish people in Albania, the Jewish population increased tenfold during those years, from approximately 150 people before the war to nearly 1,800 afterward. The unique relationship between the Albanian and Jewish peoples has continued ever since and has grown even stronger since the establishment of diplomatic relations. Prime Minister Edi Rama is a true friend of Israel and a courageous champion in the fight against anti-Semitism. He is a leader who does not hesitate to speak out boldly in support of Israel and to condemn those who seek to deny its legitimacy. It is my great honor to invite His Excellency, Mr. Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania, to address the conference.
Thank you so much, and let me tell you how honored I am to be here and how grateful I am to the organizers, to whom I want simply to address a very kind criticism about the accuracy of the number, because we have brought a few years ago in Yad Vashem the full, as far as now, while we continue to research on that, but the full list of Jews that were rescued and saved by the ordinary people and families, and it amounts to 3,700 and some dozen children. It is a great honor to stand before you, leaders and representatives of the international Jewish community, many of whom are long-standing friends of my country too. We are small nations in size and in numbers, but immense in spirit. By the way, let me say this, a few times ago, I learned that suddenly Israel became within its borders a population of 10 million. And I want to begin by saying that I simply and deeply felt joyful, because I believe that every new Jewish life, every newborn Jew is a blessing, not only for Israel, but for the world. The world whose moral debt toward the Jewish people can never be erased, never settled, and never turned into a clean sheet. The Talmud teaches that whoever saves a single life, it is as if they have saved the entire world. That sentence alone explains why anti-Semitism is not merely hatred against Jews, but an assault on the moral architecture of humanity itself. I once heard my late, deeply respected friend Shimon Peres say, "The spirit cannot be burned in the ovens." And he was right. Spirit endures. It survives hatred, persecution, and even attempts to annihilation. The Jewish spirit has been tested more than any other, and yet it prevails, always prevails. There is a profound history that binds our peoples together. The most widely known chapter is, of course, the Holocaust, when Albania became the only country in Europe not to hand over a single Jew, and the only one where, as it was said, Jewish population grew during the war. While Jews were fleeing other countries to escape death, many came to Albania to save their lives. Under the promise of Besa, our sacred word of honor, a promise that is protected by life itself. But our shared legacy does not begin or end with the Holocaust. For centuries, the size of our land never limited the reach of our solidarity towards the Jews. Albania was good to Jews long before goodness carried any political value. And let me tell you that Vlora, our biggest medieval city, had a Jewish majority population. While Jews were fleeing the West because of the tides of persecutions, they found always a safe refuge in Albania. And it was not a strategy, it was instinct. It was a moral reflex. The Hebrew Bible tells us justice shall you pursue. Not comfort, not convenience. Justice repeated twice, because it is never simple and it is never finished. That instinct explains why Albania was the first country in Europe in 1932, when anti-Semitism was already rising, to legally recognize the right of the Jewish community to observe Shabbat as a human right, and to impose to employers, both in public and private sector, to respect such a human right if they didn't want to be fined. And during the Holocaust, when Nazi officials demanded lists of Jews and of their gold, Albania answered through his authorities and then sealed through the 4 religious leaders to whom the Nazis referred as moral leaders and asked help for these 2 issues was simple and final. You can take their gold, you cannot take our Jews. The gold was theirs to take, the Jews were ours to protect. And this is not a legend. This is record. It is a compass. Today, anti-Semitism is once again resurfacing, openly and shamelessly, often disguised as political critique, cultural anxiety, or even worse, moral superiority. History taught us one thing, that unfortunately, even in the spaces of high thinking in Europe, is often forgotten. The hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Albania stands firmly against anti-Semitism without ambiguity and without exception, just as we stand against Islamophobia, racism, and every ideology that reduces human beings to targets. Hatred does not begin with violence, as anti-Semitism does not begin with violence. It begins with language. It begins with indifference. It begins with excuses. It begins with normalization of what should never be accepted as normal. Albania advocates peace through dialogue in our region, the Western Balkans, in Europe and beyond. We live in a place that was labeled for many, many times as the keg powder of Europe. But we believe in peace and we work for peace. Nevertheless, there is something very clear to us. Peace does not and cannot mean neutrality toward terror. Terrorism is not a perspective. It is not a grievance and either a freedom-fighting activity. It's not a negotiating partner. It is just a crime against humanity. So the massacre of October the 7th was not resistance. It was mass murder. And while the suffering of innocent Palestinians in Gaza is real, is truly heartbreaking, it is a madness to blur moral lines or to legitimize terror in the name of proportionality. The book of Psalms reminds us, seek peace and pursue it. Yes, we should seek peace and pursue it. But in the meantime, we should not lose sight on the very obvious fact that terror in Gaza works as a knife with a double edge. One edge is on the throat of the Jewish people. The other edge is on the throat of the Palestinian people. And that's why it cannot be peace without the Palestinian leadership committed to the life of the Palestinians, not to the death of the Israelis. In this common struggle against anti-Semitism, radicalism, and terror, Albania stands firmly with all those who refuse to forget the lessons of history and refuse to let silently repeat its darkest chapters. Our grandparents taught us that being Muslim and sheltering Jews is an honor, that being Christian and doing so is a duty, that being human meant protecting other humans, whatever the cost, whatever their religion, and whatever their language. The Mishnah teaches, in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. That same spirit guided Albania when we offered refuge to Iranian dissidents targeted by Tehran assassins. It guided us again when we welcomed Afghan families abandoned by the coalition after the fall of Kabul. And it guides us today. Albania has emerged from dictatorship and isolation to find its voice on the international stage. But our ambition is not power, it is permanence. Through cooperation and dignity through example. And if we remember, as Jewish tradition reminds us, that the world stands on three things: justice, truth, and peace, then we may yet understand that under the heaven's eye, we are all on the same side. Let me finish by saying a truth that should be repeated as much as possible. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It is a civilizational test, a test of our humanity. And history has already taught us enough what happens when that test is failed. Thank you so much.
Your busy schedule to visit Israel and take part in this conference. It's a true testament to the strong friendship and shared destiny between our peoples. Hanukkah reminds us that the smallest light can overcome great darkness. This year, we were painfully reminded of the devastating power of allowing incitement and hatred to grow. Rabbi Yeruham Ullman, director of Chabad of Bondi, senior member of the Sydney Bet Din, proved once more that darkness can be overcome by light and faith alone. I'm honored to invite Rabbi Yeruham Ullman to address the audience.
I hope Amichai Shikli, Minister of the Diaspora and Fight Against Anti-Semitism, our dear friend and steadfast ally, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, and Mrs. Morrison, Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama, and Mrs. Rama, distinguished rabbis, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen.
I stand before you today not only as a rabbi and not only as a community leader from Sydney. I stand here as a man who has buried loved ones, as someone whose family and community was struck by terror, and in a place that had always symbolized safety, sunlight, and calm. For us, anti-Semitism is not a theory. It is not a policy debate. It is not a headline. It is an empty seat at a Shabbat table. It is a voice that will never be heard again. The attack in Bondi took my beloved son-in-law. It took members of our community, good people, who contributed so much to the community. Parents of young children, spouses, a 10-year-old child, Jews who lived with dignity and love for humanity. So when we speak today about anti-Semitism, we have to understand that for us, it is not academic. It is painfully, unavoidably real. Yesterday, His Excellency the Prime Minister, and Minister Shikli, spoke so eloquently about fighting anti-Semitism by exposing lies, by lobbying for zero tolerance for anti-Semitism in Western countries. Allow me to look at a response to anti-Semitism from a different angle, a different perspective. In the hours after the attack, Sydney was wrapped in shock and grief. And within that fog, a question surfaced. And it's the same question that has followed the Jewish people for thousands of years. What now? The instinct, when hunted, is to hide. Lower your profile. Blend in. Be less visible. Well-meaning voices told us, be careful. Don't provoke. Stay quiet for a while. But we made a conscious decision. For every Jewish life taken, we would add Jewish life. If they targeted us because we are Jews, then the answer was not less Judaism, the answer is more. More light, more mitzvahs, more presence, more pride. And that decision changed everything. We realized something essential. If Jewish identity is built only on shared trauma, then we hand our children a burden and not a gift. If being Jewish means remembering who hated us, from Pharaoh to Hamas, we must always remember the Holocaust as we do today. We must always remember our history. But that is the only message we give our children. Then Judaism becomes a survival club defined by pain. And no child wants to inherit an identity whose main feature is persecution. Anti-Semitism must never be what defines us. A positive Jewish identity does. The beauty of Torah, the warmth of community, the meaning of mitzvahs, the privilege of carrying a mission larger than ourselves. And when a child grows up experiencing Judaism as life-giving and joyful, then hatred loses its power and pride becomes our armor. This truth was taught with absolute clarity by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. The Rebbe taught that anti-Semitism is not provoked by Jewish strength, but by Jewish weakness. And we're not talking about physical weakness, but spiritual uncertainty. When Jews apologize for who they are, the world censors it. When Jews hide, the world chases. But when Jews stand with what we call Geon Yaakov, with confident, unapologetic Jewish dignity, something remarkable happens. Respect replaces contempt. In Sydney, those Jews who would wear kippah did not remove the kippah, and more people put them on. We did not retreat from public space. On the final night of Hanukkah, we returned to the beach with a crowd 20, 30 times larger than ever before. And the wider Australian public did not pity us, they respected us. Because dignity attracts respect and fear attracts disdain. Friends, allow me to say something difficult, but said with love, responsibility, and deep loyalty. Anti-Semitism cannot be defeated with diplomacy alone. Public relations alone will never win this battle. For years, we have tried to justify Jewish existence by proving we are just like everyone else, a democracy like them, a tech hub even better than them, a nation that needs land for security reasons. But if we are only like them, then the question will always return. Why here? Why this land? The Jewish claim for the land of Israel is not merely historical or political, it is biblical. The land is ours because the Creator of the world entrusted it to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Jewish life disconnects from the Torah, it weakens the very title deed that makes our claim unshakable. When we are embarrassed by our heritage, the world becomes comfortable questioning our legitimacy. But when Israel lives openly as a Jewish state, rooted in eternal values, something shifts. Authenticity commands respect. To the distinguished non-Jewish leaders and diplomats here today, we ask how hatred grows so rapidly, how radicalization turns grievance into terror. The answer begins with education. Not only education of the mind, but education of the soul. A society that teaches children that there is no higher authority eventually loses its moral anchor. If a child believes there is no accountability beyond himself, then there's a much greater chance that violence becomes rational. Human civilization rests on the simple truth that life is sacred, that justice matters, and that we answer to something higher than power. The Torah gave humanity the 7 universal moral laws, principles of justice, dignity, and responsibility. I urge world leaders to consider something profoundly simple. introduce a moment of silence in schools. Only 1 minute at the start of each day. A moment for reflection, purpose, for the awareness that our actions matter. And when a child grows up knowing there is an eye that sees and an ear that hears, he usually will not grow into a terrorist. They will grow into a moral human being. This is not only how we fight anti-Semitism, this is how we save civilization from itself. Friends, I carry grief that does not fade. But grief must never become our identity. Let the legacy of those who lost be strength, not fear. Let us leave here with clarity. To my Jewish brothers and sisters, be Jewish, be proud, be visible. To the state of Israel, be the Holy Land, not only a refuge, but a holy land. To nations of the world, raise children who know they are accountable to something higher than themselves. When we live our truth without apology, darkness retreats and light wins. Mashiach is so close. It is up to us to make the world ready. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Ullman. Upon assuming office in 2018, the Honorable Scott Morrison, AC, Australia's 30th Prime Minister, made it clear, both in words and in action, that he viewed Israel as a strategic partner and that Australia was committed to the security and well-being of the Jewish community in Australia. Following the assumption of office by Anthony Albanese, Australia, once a true friend of Israel, turned its back. The Jewish community was left alone in the face of rising anti-Semitism, and the devastating consequences were made clear this past December. The former Prime Minister once again chose the courageous and principled path, standing with the Jewish community and taking a clear, uncompromising stance, condemning the Australian government for allowing this to happen. I am honored to invite Mr. Scott Morrison to deliver his remarks.
I won't have to put them as high as our Albanian friends. It is a solemn honour and privilege to be here with Jenny in Jerusalem on this of all days. And I want to extend my sincere thanks to my friend Minister Chickley, who was a great friend of the Jewish community all around the world, but particularly in Australia. And I want to thank Minister Chickley, as I'm sure Rabbi Ullman would concur, for rushing to be amongst us so soon after the Bondi terrorist attacks. Can I also thank Prime Minister, my friend Benjamin Netanyahu. Can I thank him for his strength? Can I thank him for his leadership and for his unwavering commitment to the future and security of Israel, and for exercising what Israel has, which is its right, its justifiable and righteous right to defend itself. Can I also thank Rabbi Ullman? Can I thank you, Rabbi, for the strength of your faith, for your love, for your wisdom, and for your strength, despite the incredible personal loss that you have personally suffered. You have been able to be the voice, the one true voice, that has been able to draw so many Australians together, and you saw that and heard that on display here today. Thank you, Rabbi. Friends, following the end of the Second World War, Australia became a place of refuge for Holocaust survivors seeking a new and peaceful life. Those survivors became part of the broader Australian success story of post-war migration that produced what I believe has been the most successful immigration and multicultural nation on earth. Today, 1 in 2 Australians is either born overseas or has at least become a global standard bearer for cultural diversity and social cohesion. But the events of December 14, when 2 extreme Islamist terrorists, a father and his son, opened fire on a joyous and innocent gathering of Jews celebrating the first night of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach, Australia forfeited its claim to that story. The place to which Jewish people once fled has become a place many Jewish Australians now fear. This is a desecration. We are a broken-hearted nation, but for our Jewish community, we are a nation that has broken its promise to them. A promise of safety and freedom from persecution and fear. The late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks warned that when anti-Semitism becomes violent, it represents the first and clearest sign of a civilization in crisis, and that the hate that begins with the Jews does not end with the Jews. After the first mass and world's worst mass terrorist attack on the Jewish community anywhere in the world since October 7, Australians must confront not only the security and intelligence failures exposed by these attacks, but the fragility of our own society that was shredded by the anti-Semitism that was unleashed in Australia after October 7, long before these murders were committed. According to the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, in the 2 years following the October 7 terrorist attacks in Israel, anti-Semitic incidents in Australia increased 5-fold, from an average of 343 over the previous decade each year to an average of 1,659 on average in 2024 and 2025. There were more incidents in those just 2 years than in the previous 11 years combined. Within 48 hours of October 7, pro-Palestinian protesters gathered at the Sydney Opera House chanting violent anti-Semitic slogans. Regular protests followed in Sydney and in Melbourne over the next 2 years, culminating in an estimated 100,000 people marching across our Sydney Harbour Bridge alongside those calling for globalised intifada, death to Israel Defence Forces, the elimination of the Jewish state from the river to the sea, and even the display of portraits of Iran's supreme leader. As Ayaan Hirsi Ali observed of similar protests in the UK, many participants were compassionate people seeking peace, but they chose to march side by side with those promoting hatred. During this period in Australia, Jewish professionals and artists and journalists were doxxed. Jewish businesses were targeted and forced to close. Homes were vandalised with violent slogans. Synagogues were attacked, including firebombings where worshippers were inside. Jewish students were ostracised on campus, and academics intimidated into silence or conformity with a rigid or activist orthodoxy on Israel. At the policy level, the Albanese Labor government ended 75 years of bipartisan support for Israel by unilaterally recognising Palestinian statehood. Unmoved praise by surprising that radicalised Islamists bent on violence convinced themselves their movement had arrived and that another Australian icon, Bondi Beach, should be the scene for their atrocity. Australia must now write a new chapter and honour those we mourn by confronting hard truths. This story must begin with disarming anti-Semitism. And the December 14 attacks. Dr. Jordan Peterson has warned, like Rabbi Sacks, that the Jews are the eternal canary in the coal mine and that their persecution signals the collapse of the society. Anti-Semitism, he argues, is a byproduct of resentment, not reason, where malice replaces self-examination. On the progressive left, it is rooted in neo-Marxist identity frameworks that classify Jews from historic, with Israel used as a proxy for animus that already exists. As Peterson has said repeatedly, anti-Zionism functions psychologically as anti-Semitism with plausible deniability. It is also conveniently aligned with fashionable anti-US, anti-capitalist, globalist narratives, where Israel and the Jews are treated as a shopfront for US-led Western imperialism, as they call it. On the radical right, anti-Semitism takes conspiratorial and ethno-nationalist forms. Peterson condemns this outright as intellectually primitive, myth-based, and historically catastrophic. It is, I believe, a pathetic projection of personal failure and insecurity. In all its forms, anti-Semitism flourishes where responsibility is replaced by grievance politics. And when failure is moralised as systemic injustice, liberal norms collapse. Individual responsibility is excused in the name of grievance, and institutions, universities, cultural bodies, media, even religious organisations that become infected with this culture become the seeding grounds for those who would wish to destroy the very liberal society. Anti-Semitic strains and influences exist in Australia and must be addressed by the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and the implementation of the recommendations of the Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism. However, given the specific involvement of radicalised extremist Islam in the Bondi terrorist attacks, Australia's response